Hello and welcome back. In this video I'm going to be going over something that the book doesn't really go over but is an important part of website development, and that's actually the history of the web. Now that may not seem entirely important right off the bat. Why do I need to know what happened with the web back in the 80s and 90s if I'm going to be making a website today? And the way a lot of these web standards work is that they build on previous versions. So what ends up happening is a lot of the HTML code and the CSS code you might encounter is going to have a lot of history attached to it. And so things that might not make sense may be 20, 25 years old. So let's go ahead and I found a web timeline online. I'll go ahead and post this link on Blackboard. So the World Wide Web started actually as a scientific, I guess you could say almost a research or communication tool. And this is when the first HTML standards, I guess at that point they weren't even standards, came about. And so at this time there wasn't a lot of graphics, there wasn't a lot of alignment and making things look nice. It was purely to communicate information. So what types of things were scientists trying to communicate? Well, a lot of their information they would send as tables, charts and graphs. Not a lot of complex graphics, but the sort of graphics that you could handle very simply. So that's back in the late 80s, and I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with the CERN, but they have that Large Particle Accelerator in Europe. They're actually that organization, and they're looking for the origins of the universe. But that's actually the same organization that created the World Wide Web. And so just as a kind of a reference here, this is the first website ever. As you can see, it's there's no graphics. That didn't come until later. There's not a whole lot of things that artists might want to put into a site, like fonts, and it's purely functional. At this point in time, all you could kind of do with it was change the size of fonts, italicize them, bold. One of the kind of seminal things that HTML and the World Wide Web introduced was the concept of a link, that you could reference another piece of information through a link. And so, but as you can see, this is scientific work. This isn't to go on Amazon or eBay or Facebook or anything like that. So in this timeline, you can kind of see a lot of the history of it is scientific. This is the first photo on the internet. CERN, yep, the right there, Tim Berners-Lee posted that photo, and we'll kind of fast forward through. There's a lot of detail in this timeline that I don't necessarily consider to be that important. But the main takeaway of this is that you can see how the internet progressed from purely scientific to kind of consumer and the rest of America. And it also follows broadband adoption in this country as well. So during that time, during the late 80s, nobody really had any sort of internet connection. It was pretty rare. It was mostly the military and universities and certain businesses. What started to happen during the 90s is a lot of homes would get dial-up, and so they started to get World Wide Web access in the home over dial-up, and so the standards and what was on the web pages kind of reflects that at the time. As we start to progress in the late 90s, this is kind of when we saw I guess what you'd say were fast dial-up connections, the 56K, and then we started to see slow cable internet connections, which were still 10 times faster than a dial-up connection. That's when we really start to see the explosion of the World Wide Web and getting more into graphics and getting away from its scientific roots. And this timeline starts to go through more and more websites as they come about, and some other milestones here would definitely be smartphones and their usage. But as I mentioned before, all these standards build upon each other. So you're not going to be tested on this information. There's not going to be a quiz. It's just something in general to keep in mind, that when you're working with HTML and building a website, you might have a really difficult time maybe lining something up correctly or making it look exactly the way you want it. And that's because a lot of this has its roots back in the scientific era, when they weren't trying to make things look pretty, they were trying to make them functional. And this is just in computing in general. Things tend to build and have a lot of historical baggage. Think of it as other industries, like say a building. You build a building, you use it for a while. If they want to build a new building, they might knock the old one down. That's not really how the computing industry works in general. Think of that more like a historic district. No matter how bad of the shape in the building, you just have to fix the old building and make it look nice and do what you can with it. And that's really how HTML and HTTP and these other web standards like CSS and JavaScript try to fix. So I'll go ahead and go through that and post a link. Here's just kind of another reference. I found another site. You can go through and Google these, but I'll post this one as well. This is Dell.com back in 1996. You can see a lot of clip art, and this was at the time cutting edge, because those were large graphics, and I'm sure that site didn't load exactly the fastest. Here's another one that's interesting. If you go to the New York Times now, it doesn't look anything like that. A large color image on the front like that would be kind of a big deal for a website back in 1995. But like I said, you're not going to be tested on this. This is just general information to keep in mind. Okay, I'll see you in the next video.